Hi, everybody. Welcome to Celebrating Aviation with Mike Mashat. Today, we're going to talk about the Air Force Flight Test Center Museum mural entitled The Golden Age of Flight Test. If you've tuned into the channel before, you've known that I talk about the X-planes. You can see here the whole family of exotic, one-of-a-kind, dedicated flight research aircraft used in the late 40s and early 50s. And that all happened at a place out in the desert on the edge of Rogers Dry Lake called Muroc, which was actually the name of the Coram family spelled backwards. The Corams settled that area. It was a Santa Fe Railroad stop on the edge of the lakebed in 1910. And it eventually was developed into the Muroc Army Air Base and Flight Test Center in just after World War II. It was renamed Edwards Air Force Base in 1949 after Captain Glenn Edwards, who sadly was lost in the crash of the YB-49 Flying Wing. And in 1957, what was called the Super Base, or as it's known today, Main Base, was completed, and the original South Base complex you can see there off to the right. So the idea was to create a mural for this new museum that would incorporate aircraft of the 1940s, the 1950s, the 1960s, and 1970s, and show all these aircraft together in a composition that would look something like this. You've heard the term back of the napkin sketch. This is it. This is the very first iteration of an idea of putting these airplanes in formation. The original idea was to have the X-planes being launched from their motherships simultaneously. Good trick, but it was a way to show all these different eras and aircraft. There would be 16 aircraft total, including the chase planes of the major types. And I developed a schematic to present to the Flight Test Historical Foundation, which was the governing body for the museum, the fundraising body of the museum. So this is the idea. By decade, the X-1, the Skyrocket, the X-2, the X-15, and the shuttle for the approach and landing tests, representing the key programs at Edwards from the late 40s to the late 70s. You see here Colonel Jimmy Doolittle, good friend and former commandant of the test pilot school. He was a fighter pilot, test pilot, and became chairman of the Flight Test Historical Foundation. He's pictured here with Bob Hoover in an F-16. He was flown on the 50th anniversary of Chuck Yeager's supersonic flight. But Colonel Doolittle came up with a very interesting concept. He looked at the schematic and he said, well, the motherships were very prominent. Is there some way that I could make the X-planes the largest? And this was the beginning of the mural right here. This sketch was the culmination of that idea, the first iteration in a visual. And lo and behold, this became the concept for the mural. The next step in the process of creating this image was to build models and use models of every one of the key airplanes in that initial formation. And you can see here, we are on Rosamond Dry Lake. That's parked in the shadow of my car to keep it nice and cool. But here's what we did. We went out on Rosamond Dry Lake at 10:30 in the morning, facing to the south. And here you see my good friend Tony Landis on the right, and just out of frame, then Staff Sergeant Tony Accurso. And the three of us became Team Mural. And here, Tony Landis and Tony Accurso are holding the different models in the position they would be in the composition, facing south at 10:30 in the morning. I chose that time because it was a good sun angle, number one. It was about the time that Yeager went supersonic in the X-1, and it was a little cooler than middle of the day. So we shot all 16 key airplanes on the lakebed at that time. The next step, photograph the background, get shots of the base. I wanted to be at 10,000 feet, AGL, looking to the south, again at 10:30 in the morning to match the lighting of the scenery with the lighting on the models. So courtesy of the test pilot school, I was flown in a T-38 for this photo mission. And let's climb aboard and I'll take you up. Here's our takeoff roll on hallowed runway 22 at Edwards, a very, very famous piece of real estate. Tony Landis was at the side of the runway as we lifted off. This is our airplane actually taking flight. So we arrived at 10,000 feet AGL, and we made one pass from east to west over Highway 58 looking to the south. And I got my photo, the money shot, first try. So we were done after 15 minutes, mission accomplished, but we had an hour's worth of fuel. So what better way to experience the whole Edwards flight test realm than in the T-38 for the remaining 45 minutes. And come on and join me and we'll see what we did here. We started with some close contact flying. Love this photo. This is just the epitome of formation flight with another TPS T-38 that we rendezvoused with in the area. And some air combat maneuvering, formation aerial maneuvering here. Here's a tower flyby. This is an interesting scenario. We run a low-level, high-speed course, 500 knots at about 50 feet, and there's a start gate and an end gate, and this is for instrument calibration for all the aircraft at Edwards. So here's what that looks like at the cockpit. And we winded up with a landing on the lakebed, just like all the X-planes did. So here's a T-38 arriving on the lakebed. This is an interesting phenomenon. This lakebed is 13 by 7 miles. And it's like landing in a giant ocean of sand. The depth perception is different. It's really a tricky deal. If you look to the left of the photo, you see an arrowhead-shaped pointer there at the canopy frame. And that's actually, they call them the doghouse. But these were the visual aim points for the space shuttles landing at Edwards. They were painted at the end of every runway. And this is the one for 2-2, but it's painted right out there on the lakebed. So we have our photo of the background. We have the photo of all the models. And this is the first assembly of all those components to start showing the mural in final form. We're going to add the Edwards exploration patch there at the lower right. We're going to throw in a lifting body. We have the X3, the X5, some of the other airplanes. And it's just starting to come together. Once the sizes are adjusted, the final drawings are created. And then what you see here are the actual drawings at size taped to the armature that became the mural. This was created by then museum director Doug Nelson. Doug and his wife Isla literally created the flight test museum at Edwards from scratch, and they gave this mural a home, and I'm very, very grateful for their effort. But this is the imagery applied to the board, which would become the finished artwork. So here you can see it. It's kind of raw. It's going to be eventually framed and look much more presentable, but this is the way it was done as the museum literally was being built around it. We have the sky in there to define what the airplanes are going to look like, and you can start getting a sense of where we're headed with this. This is actually the museum under construction and being outfitted with everything. On the right, you see a full-size, 100% scale replica of Chuck Yeager's Glamorous Glennis, the Bell X-1 that he became the first person to fly supersonic. On the left is a Pratt & Whitney J58 of a SR-71, and it's really the beginning of a wonderful, wonderful exhibit of Edwards history. And here I am up on a B4 stand. This was acquired by Staff Sergeant Curso from the maintenance unit there, and this became my home for the better part of 3 months, actually. I lived up in the desert from Monday to Friday, working at night to paint the mural. I came home on the weekends, and this was the drill for about 3 months in late 1999. Okay, so here's the evolution of the artwork step by step. This is the underpainting of the sky. I say underpainting because this is the first layer of color. It's pretty raw. You can see the brush strokes, but it just is kind of the ground layer, almost a primer coat, which will be applied all the way through the process. Airplanes, background, all have underpaintings and then are developed into the final color. So here we go. This is the sky. Then we're going to add the ground. And now we're starting to put in the airplanes. These photos were taken probably, I want to say about 2 weeks apart. It was about 2 weeks of work to get each step here. And now we're going to take it to about 80%. We still have to put markings on the airplanes, but we're getting pretty close. And this is the finished product. The title again was Golden Age of Flight Test, 1947, 1977. There are 16 key aircraft in the main formation and a total of 40 support aircraft weaving their way in and out of all the different parts of the mural, plus some scenes that are hidden, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The mural was dedicated and the museum opened in July of 2000. And here we have some of the legends of Edwards history. From left, Major General Joe Engel, who flew the X-15 and the space shuttle. He is today the last surviving X-15 pilot. In the center is Lieutenant Colonel Fitz Fulton, referred to as father of the motherships. And he flew all three of those motherships you see above, the B-29 that launched the X-2, the B-52 that launched the X-15s, and the 747 that launched the shuttle on the 5 approach and landing tests. And to my right is General Chuck Yeager. So here's the finished image, and we'll get into a little more detail. Oh, wait a minute, up in the extreme upper right-hand corner is a little speck of some sort. What is that? Ah, that's Chuck Yeager in the inverted spin of the X-1A, tumbling down from 73,000 feet. One of the greatest feats of airmanship in the history of aviation. He recovered this airplane after going Mach 2.44, the fastest ever flown at that time, and made it back to Edwards in one piece. And it was just an amazing, an amazing amount of skill and flying prowess to pull that off. And I had to honor that in the mural. So here's the left-hand key airplanes, the Bell X-1 and the Skyrocket at top, the motherships, the B-29 and B-50, the chase aircraft, P-80 and F-86, and down below the swing wing X-5, the X-3 Stiletto, and the X-10, which is a significant airplane. It was the first unmanned aircraft. We have so much unmanned technology today, but the X-10 was the very first airplane and the first turbojet-powered aircraft to go Mach 2. Here's the right side of the mural, and we see the X-2, the X-15 above, the shuttle Enterprise, which never went into space. It was dedicated to the approach and landing missions. The chase planes here are the F-100 and the T-38. Motherships are the B-52 and 747. And down below, we have the Northrop X-4 Bantam, the Northrop YB-49 Flying Wing, and the North American XB-70 Valkyrie. And here's the base. A little bit hard to see some of the detail in this photo, but the mural was designed so that the horizon was at 52 inches above the floor. That's considered museum visual height, the average height for the human eye position. And so what you're doing is you stand in front of the mural close to it, you're looking down at the base and up at the airplanes. Interwoven in this scene are 12 moments from the movie Toward the Unknown, which was the greatest Edwards movie ever filmed back in 1956. And we'll talk about that in a second also. Base housing is there to the right, the runway complex in Rogers Dry Lake to the left, and Rosamond up in the upper right. A little bit of story on the H-21 rescue helicopter. And you see the Edwards patch here. The H-21 Piasecki copter was an integral part of Edwards' history. It carried the flight surgeons on the X-15 missions. It would fly out to the lakebed, and it would actually be flown out to the emergency lakes that were dotting the path of the X-15 on its launch from Nevada, so that it would always be there ready to rescue a pilot if he had to make an emergency landing. So Colonel Fulton came to the museum early on. He saw the very beginnings of the mural, even before the color was applied, and Fitz was just such a fine gentleman and a wonderful pilot and just such a humble, wonderful guy. And he took me aside and he said, would it be okay if I made a suggestion? He was almost apologetic. He just said, you know, you've got the H-21 way in the background. He says, that aircraft and those crews really deserve to have more prominence. Would there be any way you could put it up a little more forward in the composition? And I was honored. I said, absolutely, you bet. And so the H-21 is now prominently flying there over the desert. And it was Colonel Fulton who brought this to my attention, and I'll be forever thankful. As I mentioned, hidden in the scene are moments from the movie Toward the Unknown. And what we have here is the iconic takeoff of the Martin XB-51, what was referred to as the Gilbert XF-20 in the movie. So you've got Lincoln Bond in the F-100 and General Banner in the XF-120. And that takeoff scene is just one of the greatest movie moments ever filmed. And so in this painting, Lincoln's Bond, it shows that moment, and that is hidden in the mural, as is the final scene in the movie, which is the Thunderbirds. They perform an air show as General Banner has a parade and leaves to go back to a staff position in DC. And so the Thunderbirds were a really big part of the end of the movie. Here you see team leader Jack Broughton in the center. To his right is the movie's director, Mervyn LeRoy. To his left is actress Virginia Leith. And to her left is William Holden, who was the star of the movie. And they're pictured there with the other members of the Thunderbirds team and a F-84 Thunderstreak. Well, there you have it, the story of the Edwards mural. Hope you enjoyed it. And thank you very much for celebrating aviation with Mike Mashat. I'd like to acknowledge the wonderful folks who helped make that mural possible. Tony Landis and Tony Curso, again, assisted every step of the way. Doug Nelson was the director of the museum and, as I said, gave that mural a home. The entire staff of the Air Force Test Center History Office couldn't have done more to help. The late Dr. Jim Young was just a guiding inspiration, just offered so much great historical input. Edwards historian Cheryl Gum, again, gave so many wonderful ideas and was so helpful with research material. Colonel Chris Ledette was the Air Force flight surgeon during this era and made so many wonderful things happen. And again, my thanks to Colonel Jimmy Doolittle for his guidance and support of the project. And finally, to the Flight Test Historical Foundation, my eternal thanks for making this project possible. They funded the project and sponsored everything about it. And it was just one of the highlights of my career, and I'm so thankful. So again, thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed the program and you like the channel, go ahead and subscribe, and we will see you next time.